Hi everyone, my name is Berna and I'm an international student from Turkey studying business at the University of Toronto. In 2020, the University of Toronto domestic tuition was $6,100, whereas the international students paid $57,000. And for upper year students, that amount went up to $67,400. That's insane, especially when you're thinking about the 4 or 5 years of studies for each program. But why the divide? Why do international students pay a lot more than domestic students? And it's not only UFT but all universities across Canada and all over the world. But especially the divide is much greater in North America. In the US, all state universities have similar approaches, but rather than dividing people into international and domestic students, they divide according to their residency. For example, at the University of Michigan, residents of Michigan only pay $8,300, whereas non-residents pay $26,400. But the cool thing about this here is that non-residents include international students and American citizens who don't live in that particular state. So I think it's less hurtful that way, but it's still the same system. And then the most private universities in the States charges people the same amount of money regardless of their background and their citizenship. So in this video, I thought I would put my business degree to good use to try to understand why there is that huge gap between international fees and domestic fees and where is that money going towards. To understand that, let's look at the financial statements of University of Toronto from 2020, which is available to the public. So universities have 5 main sources of income. So the 50% of all the income comes from tuition fees from domestic and international students. 33.6% of all the revenue comes from the grants. And the rest comes from donations, investments, and other sales and services from the university. Okay, when we look at the expenses in 2020, we can see that University of Toronto had almost $3.2 billion in expenses. And here is the interesting thing. When we take all the expenses and divide it by the number of students across all 3 campuses, we can get a rough estimate of how much it costs to educate one student per year. According to our calculations, each student's education costs nearly $35,662. Of course, our calculation is a mere average, and I know certain degrees cost more than others, so this is just a rough estimate. So the real question is, why do international students pay $60,000 for an education that costs $35,600? And where is that money going towards? Well, the answer is simple yet complex. It's because the domestic students only pay $6,100 for an education that costs $35,600. So to make up for the deficit, the university charges significantly more to international students to pay for the domestic students' education and use the grants to cover the rest of that, because only 21% of the students are international and the rest is domestic. But the international students play a significant role in the Canadian education system. So are we the cash cows of the university system? The student group admitted into the university to simply pay for the Canadian students' tuition. Maybe, but not entirely. My experience at the university is that many international students are extremely rich. Like, some of them drive Ferraris to class. And seeing that, I think a lot of domestic students or other Canadians don't feel bad about charging international students like 10 times more for their education. But the truth is that a lot of international students are struggling to pay their tuition, or their families are significantly struggling. They're like selling their houses, selling their cars, because a lot of the international students are not from wealthy countries. They're mainly from developing countries, and they're trying to look for better education because the education in their home countries is not up to par. The largest population of international students are from India. And India has a GDP per capita of 2,700 Canadian dollars. And then the second largest population is from China with a GDP per capita of like 13,000 Canadian dollars. So how do universities expect these students to pay if their families only earn from like $3,000 to $10,000? They don't. That's why a lot of the families are very, very wealthy families, and then like a smaller percentage is from those families who sacrifice so much for their kids or have been saving their entire lives. And at this point, you might even think that the system makes sense. Take from the rich and give it to Canadian students. What about the wildly creative, smart individuals and passionate students who want to change the world but cannot afford tuition? That's where the scholarships come in, or should come in, because University of Toronto notoriously doesn't give any scholarships for international students, except for one they wildly advertise on their international student admissions page. So the Lester B. Pearson International Student Scholarship, which covers all 4 years of tuition and all other expenses, which sounds like a dream, but it is, because it's only given to 37 international students a year. And to give you a perspective, there's roughly 18,777 international students. So this award only covers 0.7% of all the international student population across all different disciplines. 7 people out of 1,000 students get this award. That's nothing. Like I said, unfortunately, this is not unique to UFT, but at least University of Toronto is honest about their scholarships or lack thereof. Because when I was applying to universities in the US, a lot of the universities just straight up lied about their scholarships on their websites. I applied to the universities that were smaller and less prestigious, even though I had like a really high SAT score, just because they were giving higher scholarships for international students. But I got rejected from all those universities because it literally said, we would accept you if you can find sponsors on your own, because like the highest scholarship that we are giving is like 11,000 US, whereas the tuition is like $50,000 or something like that. I always got emails like that, which I thought was really messed up, because for each university you have to pay a certain amount of money. So all of that money was wasted just because these universities lied on their websites, which is like a whole entirely different issue. So how can we fix this situation and give a fair chance to international students who truly deserve it and who don't have the funds? Like, I'm okay with my millionaire friends paying $60,000 a year. That's fine, I think. So the first solution I have is actually increase international student scholarships, and they don't all have to be like covering all the tuition and all expenses, but at least try to cover like 50% of it, or like 40%. Really, anything helps at this point. And this is very doable. In 2020, UFT had a net income of $441 million. This is like, take that in, because I think we all think universities break even or they don't make that much income because they're supposed to be not-for-profit organizations, but they end up with like $441 million, which majority of that comes from tuition alone. So it's not that universities don't have the funds to give away to students, but they choose to take those funds and invest in things for the future. And not only capital, not invest into the university buildings, but outside they buy a lot of buildings and they rent those out and take in the income. With like $441 million, they could have educated 12,387 students. I don't expect all that money to go towards international students, but they could educate at least like 1,000 students every year instead of like 37, because that's like pathetic. That's nothing. So the second option is change domestic fees. I'm not saying increase it for everyone, but do it according to income. Canada has an amazing taxation system where the people with less income pay hardly any taxes or no taxes at all, and where the wealthy people pay a lot more taxes. This way the whole country benefits as a whole. They could do a very similar thing for the domestic students, so look at their family income and charge them accordingly. And Canada is like a very wealthy country. Like, the GDP per capita is almost $60,000, so if both parents work, that's almost $120,000, and $6,100 in tuition is nothing compared to $120,000. Especially when you think about, you're expecting Indian families who earn like $3,000 a year to pay $60,000 in tuition. It's just wrong. And then finally, even if we keep all the tuition fees the same, why can't we give international student loans? Like, a lot of domestic students take on loans to pay for their education, whereas international students, they don't have the option to get a loan because life happens, like especially for those circumstances that we cannot plan for, like the economy, like the death of someone in the family, or businesses going bankrupt. This kind of stuff happens all the time. Especially for those circumstances, there should be loans for international students. That's all I have for this video. Thank you so much, especially if you stayed until the very end. Let's share this video so we can create awareness, because I know a lot of students that are friends of mine that are struggling with paying their tuition. And let's get universities involved so we can create better solutions. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye.